Hey everyone, Brian from Sui Generis Brewing here, and it's been, I think, well over a month since my last update, so it's time for a quick update on the 50-meter beer project. And I think to start, I'd just like to point out that we have a successful harvest. The grain has been threshed and winnowed. It's nice and clean, other than a little bit of soil that carried through, but is almost ready for malting. I'm actually in the process of doing a germination test, and if it's come out of dormancy and is ready to germinate, I'm going to start malting it as soon as I can, because my plan for brewing this year would benefit from having the malt done in late September or early October. Now, this is sort of a good news, bad news type situation, so let's start with the good news. Well, first bit of good news is Maybe's here to visit. But the other piece of good news is the new Thresher worked pretty well. It's not perfect, needs some work for next year, but this represents probably the single greatest labor-saving device that I've added to this home barley growing and malting process. Now, the irony here, of course, is that threshing technology dates back all the way to the 1750s, I believe, and it hasn't really changed since then. I mean, sure, they added steam power after horsepower, and combines not only thresh grain, but they also cut it, bale it, and also winnow, which means clean the grain as well. But the fundamental technology has not really changed, and it's actually incredibly simple. In fact, it's so simple I can animate it in PowerPoint. Basically, you have a spinning wheel with little fingers sticking out of it. You stick your grain in, and because the straw is strongest along its length, these spinning wheels will strip the grain off without taking the straw. So if we look at this, that is exactly what this does. This just simply spins. I power it with a drill, and it strips the grain off. So there were a few downsides to my design, so I'm going to try and correct this next year. The biggest one was I directly drove this with a drill, and the problem there is if there's any slight angle on the drill relative to the drive shaft, you get a lot of vibration. That actually caused one of the bearings to break through the sidewall, and you can see here I have screws that kind of lock everything in place, and those vibrations would cause those to come loose. Now that's a simple solution, but a Loctite, that problem goes away. But I think really next year I need to move to a pulley system so that I can kind of balance out any misalignments between my motor and the thresher. The other issue is probably shouldn't have 3D printed the shell. It did break through. Now part of that was because of the drill issues, but it's just really not the right material. So next year I'm going to hopefully have this in the field with me while I harvest, so I can literally cut the grain and feed it in as I go. But I think I'm going to rebuild the casing. I'm going to keep the guts because the guts work beautifully well. But I'm going to change the outer housing into something a little different. But next year, this should really save me a lot of work because I can literally cut my grain, feed it in, pull the grain out, and give the hay to the goats. No need to kind of stroop the grain and store it for a while before I process. So looking forward to that next year. This was a huge effort saving this year, so much better than how I used to thresh the grain. I didn't bother shooting any video this year. I winnowed the grain the same way this year that I did last year. So winnowing is just getting rid of all the chaff and straw and stuff that gets mixed in with the grain. And last year I came up with a system that worked well, so I just did it again. This year I basically have a high air volume fan that I put on a chair. I mount a vertical tube and I pour the grain down the tube. It goes in front of the fan, and the grain's heavy, so it drops straight down into a bucket, whereas all the chaff gets blown away off to the side. So I ran the grain through twice, and like I said at the beginning, other than some little chunks of soil that ended up stuck in the grain, it's pretty much clean and ready to roll. So that's the good news. What's the bad news? And well, the bad news, I don't know how well I can get this on camera, is well, I got a decent harvest It's not a great harvest. I have here 3.6 kilos roughly of grain, which is down from last year's 4.9 kilos, which is obviously a bit of a hit to my yield. It means I am a little underweight on the amount of grain that I have to brew with, especially since I am going to keep about 400 grams for planting next year. So I really only have about 3.2 kilos of grain to work with. And it's not surprising that the yields were poor this year. We had a very long and cold winter that went a lot further into April than is typical. Because of that, I planted almost 4 weeks late. And so because of that, this grain was growing and ripening at peak heat. And unfortunately, this is a cold weather crop. I am not growing this in a cold location. And so it got a lot of heat stress. Also, as you maybe saw in one of my previous videos, I had a lot of lodging this year, and it did occur later after most of the kernels had formed, but that also probably hurt yield a little. Now, there are a couple solutions to this. As I've mentioned in previous videos, what I'm growing here is something called Bear. This is a variant of barley that literally dates back to the Viking era. I know that I could easily double yield simply by planting a more modern variety. And even something from the 1960s would probably give me close to double the yield. But it kind of defeats the point. I mean, why grow a boring modern barley when we can grow something special? Other than that, it's just a matter of hopefully getting the crop in a little earlier this year, and maybe summer won't be quite so terrible as well. Those two things would really help out on the yield. So that's basically the update at this point. There's not really much else to say. It's been a relatively successful year on kind of the technology side. On the yield side, not so great. But I do have high hopes of getting a decent beer out of this. I have a plan on how to deal with my underproduction without overly ruining the 50-meter theme. Might become more of about a 5,000 meter beer project this year. But nonetheless, it's going to still be local, even if it isn't literally from my farm. So anyways, with that, thanks for joining me again. I'm Brian from Sioux Generis Brewing, and I'll have another update when something update-worthy takes place.